and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you this time from Guangzhou in southern China. Coming up on today's program, the Fortune Global Forum is underway in the city of Guangzhou here with the eyes fixed on innovation and open trade. I sit down with some industry players to help us understand what's the way forward despite growth challenges. And China takes up the mantle of planet protection at the recent UN Environmental Assembly in Kenya, where it wins accolades for the biggest man-made forest in the world.
Ideas nurtured by creative energy, free to flourish. As China embarks on a new journey of opening up and innovation, the best of global business gather to strategize. CGTN takes you to Guangzhou. Pioneer of progressive policies. Experience the entrepreneurial buzz at the Fortune Global Forum, Guangzhou. Only on CGTN.
You're watching World Insight. I'm standing here in Guangzhou on the site of the Fortune Global Forum, this time held in this city. The theme is innovation. Innovation is happening only as a result of human interactions and also debates, argument, and that's what the industry leaders from all over the world have been doing over the past 2 days. During their breaks, I talked to some of them to talk about innovation, how it is likely to happen. And it is not just in the technology, they say, it is also within every industry that they are doing. I talked to some of them. Jean Warlick is one of them. She's coming from investment banking. She is the managing director and vice chairman of JP Morgan. Let's hear what she had to say about innovation in the finance industry, particularly here in China and beyond. Jean, welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, a lot of idea of innovation is flying around here at the Fortune Global Forum, this time in Guangzhou. But what about innovation in the financial sector? A lot of ideas, but when becoming reality?
Well, you know, China is already the global leader in fintech. Fintech means financial technology. So, for example, in the area of payments, China is leading the world. The payment industry in China, of course, is dominated by Alibaba and Tencent. So these two companies account for 84% of the market share in online payments. And it's quite incredible. A number of years ago, we still remember Chinese people used to carry a lot of cash. They didn't have checks or credit cards. But today, China is quickly becoming a cashless and a cardless society. So everything is done on the mobile phone.
But that is only one part of innovation in the financial sector. I mean, that has been with us. I mean, the mobile pay, everybody talking about, but besides that, what else?
Well, there's lots of other areas, right? For example, if you think about Alibaba's Yuebao, that's the largest money market fund in the world. So what does Yuebao really mean? It means leftover treasures. So what it is basically a lot of people have cash in their Alibaba account. When they go shopping, they have the money in the account already. But the amount of money they're not using in the account is the so-called leftover treasures, Yuebao. So now Alibaba has aggregated all that money into the world's largest money market fund.
But it all sounds beautiful, Jing, you know that. But what's the next stage? I mean, when it comes to innovation, you have to look at the next stage. Alibaba, for example, Jack Ma was being asked today about the next stage of innovation for Alibaba. He did not give a straight answer. So what is the next stage? Is that still going to be with China?
Well, I think China and the United States are the leading innovators in technology, also in fintech. So if you think about blockchain, which is incredible, blockchain basically is the internet for money, is the internet for value. So powered by blockchain in the future, we'll have huge amounts of innovation, not just in financial services, but in other areas, healthcare, travel, entertainment, and so forth.
But will blockchain blossom, as they say? Because there are a lot of debates regarding blockchain these days, also concerning its security and its relationship with the so-called traditional banking. All these are questions unresolved.
Well, you know, blockchain is a relatively new phenomenon. And I think in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be a lot of innovation based on the blockchain technology.
But there has been a lot of difficulty for the innovation system to catch up, for the institutional build-up to catch up with the real development of technology, as you may know, Jing. There's also a lack of debates in the legal area. So when are these likely to happen? I know you're coming from the investment banking side. You hope all of these could work miraculously, but it wouldn't.
Well, there are lots of regulatory changes, and regulatory changes actually need to keep up with the rapid changes in technology. Here we are in Guangzhou looking at the Greater Bay Area, for example. So the Greater Bay Area is very interesting. You know, it's very different from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
China's Greater Bay Area encompasses 9 cities plus 2. The 2 basically are Macau and Hong Kong, plus 9 cities in Guangdong province. And there's a huge amount of innovation taking place in the Greater Bay Area. And this region is absolutely huge in terms of population and the size of GDP. GDP is $1.4 trillion US. That's the China Greater Bay Area. And that's basically the size of the South Korean economy. Population, 67 million people. That's basically 10 times bigger than the San Francisco Bay Area. So all the Chinese companies here, they're hugely innovative, based on government support, but also the entrepreneurial spirit, which has been set free.
That sounds terrific, but what would that mean for the interactions between China and the other places? People talk about competition a lot when it comes to innovation, for example, between China and the United States. But we all know when we are in a digital world, it's not going to be only competition. There are opportunities of cooperation. Do you see that is happening at all?
Well, you know, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. We cannot say innovation is happening in the United States, therefore China will lose out or vice versa. It's not true at all. I think innovation is driving the global economy. Clearly there will be winners and losers. I think in this day and age we need to look at the new economy versus the old economy, meaning the traditional companies need to capitalize on innovation that's taking place in the new economy.
Right.
That's what China's 2025 is all about. Manufacturing 2025, meaning the traditional industries which are used to make a lot of commodities and goods using traditional forms of manufacturing. Now they have to really embrace technology to really make their manufacturing processes a lot more efficient.
You know, Fortune Global Forum is not the first time being held in China. There was Beijing, there was Shanghai, there was Chengdu, and this year in Guangzhou. Do you hear, do you feel, do you see much excitement in the air about the next stage of China and the world in a way, because this is when the multinationals meet China?
Well, there's a huge amount of discussion going on at the forum about China's role in the world. You know, China is the second largest economy in the world. It's accounting for 35% of global growth. In addition, China is playing a very big role in the age of innovation. Plus, you know, U.S.-China relations, of course, are the most important bilateral relationship in the whole world these days. So I think China is meeting the world. Here at this forum, it's a microcosm of China's important role in the global economy.
Right. Thank you so much, Jane, once again for being with us. It's wonderful to see you at these events. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you.
Thank you very much.
Innovation is not just happening in the finance industry, but also in the long-time industry, real estate. According to Zhang Xin, who is a co-founder and CEO of Soho China, she talked about the innovative approach that her industry is now using, particularly with the recent business model. She also talks about what it takes when it comes to innovation to build real good new buildings with new ideas in China and beyond. Tian, welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei.
Good to see you, Tian Wei.
Good to see you here. They say innovation is in the air. Do we smell it? Can you do that? Innovation is a great idea. It seems far away from your industry, real estate.
real estate innovation for the longest part has been doing architecture design, building new buildings, and then also lately is about embracing the green buildings and, you know, injecting these sustainability elements into the buildings. Those are all innovations, right? And of course, for us now, we actually have a new product that is also a real estate innovation. So what happened is in the last 20 years, we've built a lot of buildings in China. Almost all the cities are filled with the best buildings. And some of the buildings are not fully occupied. And yet some of the smaller companies have the need, and they don't really have the means to rent the space for 3 years, 5 years, renovate them. So we came up with a new product called Soho 3Q, which is really to share the office space by many startup companies. And that is a new way, an innovative way of working.
Well, it is, but its competition is also fierce. I understand there's something called we work, your work, and they even compete against each other on the IPR issue sometime earlier ago. So I guess this is quite a competitive field. It's not like earlier when you jump into the real estate. It's still like a blue ocean, as they say, at that time.
You know, Tian Wei, you remember in the peak of the competition for real estate, we had over 50,000 developers, 50,000 developers in China. The competition was fierce. Today, I think the sharing economy on the real estate side, on the sharing office side, it's not nearly as competitive as those days when we were building buildings. And let's say that we have moved from building buildings to actually create the content inside the buildings. And so actually it's healthy to have the competition. Just remember that, you know, it's not a bad thing to have fierce competition which would enable us, each of us, to come up with a better product, better service, would benefit the market.
As long as it is based on the rules.
Right. The rules itself are also being developed.
Innovated at the same time, because they really need to catch up with the technological and the thoughts.
Right.
Having said that, though, you've been embracing something called light assets. This is one of those examples. But overall, how has that campaign been? I mean, you have buildings everywhere in China. So much asset. What is the process? How about the pace of it? Security vis-a-vis innovation.
If you go to Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, the vacancies are not that much, not that high. So you don't actually feel there's a lot of empty buildings. But actually when you go down to Tier 2, Tier 3 cities, there seem to be more vacancies there. And therefore, people like us have been thinking about what do we need to do to really increase the occupancy? Who can be the tenants that right now are under service, they're not in the buildings? Can we get them in? How do we get them in these buildings? So the easiest way is to do this share economy, the co-working space. So that if you're a company of 10 people or 20 people, you don't really have to worry about signing a long lease, renovation. You just need to come in, sign a lease of 1 day or 1 week or 1 month. And if you don't like it, a week later, if you have more needs, need bigger space, we can change instantly. So I think that's actually, you will see that many of these companies otherwise wouldn't have been working in this type of buildings.
But you know, from structure, that is what you are doing with the real estate, to now the content. This transformation for you is a learning process too. How is it being so far?
Well, we didn't used to know so many startups, for instance. Right now, if you walk into any Soho 3Qs, you will see hundreds of them.
Are you investing in some of them?
No, we haven't. You know, we're very disciplined on, we're just doing the real estate. And we're providing office space for these companies. We don't really have the ability to judge, are they good in what they're doing? So we don't do that. But in seeing these companies, they're so young and startups, and it's actually
the energy
is so high, right? And then actually it's amazing if you get a chance to see any of the 3Qs, you get really, it's a contagious energy.
Talking about the energy, you brought in a lot of energy to China's real estate as well. But working, for example, with Zaha Hadid, was a tough process, I learned from you.
That's right. Yeah, you remember that.
You brought in innovative ideas as a result. Tell me about that process, you know, the working process.
Well, you know, in every industry, there's element of innovation, right? It's not like only digitalization is innovation. You know, even if in this environment, I can think about many ways to be more innovative. So I think when we build buildings, you know, what are the things that I can bring in to make it different, to make it, so that's innovation, right? And so then architecture, art, you know, beautiful buildings is the first thing came to my mind, because I just remember these buildings form the face of a city. And it's important that we bring the best of the class to China to do this. And my 14 years working, collaborating with Zaha Hadid was the best and the most productive and the most memorable experience.
You wrote a letter even on the news that she passed away, very emotional letter. But I understand during the process, as an observer, it was not easy. The question is, when do you know it is innovation? How to bring it in so that the other party would also work with you?
For instance, let me give you a small story about working with Zaha Hadid. She, before China, most of her work was in a much smaller scale, right? I mean, that's generally the case with real estate. Only China scale is so big, right? So she was very focused on using innovative material to do buildings. So when I started working with her, I told her, look, if we bring your design language to this scale, that itself is innovation. We don't need to be thinking about every little materials. Every single bit needs to be innovative. If we do that, we actually would give ourselves so many troubles by finishing this building, because these buildings are so big, right? So let's think about how do we create this design in this mega scale of China, and yet still to be able to produce in China by the Chinese worker and with the Chinese material.
Pragmatism meets innovation.
Right, so that's the result is what you can see, all these amazing Zaha Hadid designed buildings, right?
Yeah. Final question, very briefly. What does it take to have real innovation, no matter which field?
I really think that we live in the changing environment, right, and more than ever. And the innovation really comes from, first, our own observation, as in what is changing and what is needed in the market. So I think to observe what's needed and then come up with a product that fits that demand, that itself is the process of innovation.
Innovation is not just about technology. It is everywhere. It is about the mentality as well. And as a result, China is keeping up its efforts of reform and opening up. In fact, it's already becoming a great contributor to globalization. That is according to Victor Chu, who is one of the longest-serving trustee of the World Economic Forum. He's now the co-chair of the World Economic Forum International Business Council. Victor, welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei.
Thank you very much indeed.
Fortune Global Forum, this time in Guangzhou. But you were there 1999 in Shanghai, first time ever.
Yes.
Come out party for China at that time, 2 decades ago. So much has changed.
Absolutely. The Shanghai Forum had two historical strategic directions that was made. One was it was a coming up party for Pudong.
Yes.
And look at Pudong today. It is an amazing region of the world. The other one was, I remember China decided to embrace the internet world. And again, that was a very important strategic decision for China and for the world. And since that, China become more and more connected with globalization. And China today, I think we are a leader in globalization, because other countries are having second thoughts on some of the pushback of globalization.
Right.
But from what we hear today here, we are still, speeding ahead and trying to strengthen domestic reform to catch up with globalization.
So actually, implementing innovation today is totally paving the way about the tasks for tomorrow, as you have just suggested. But what kind of implementation, what kind of innovation we need to have now, so that 20 years from now, when we talk again, Victor, that we say, we did the right thing?
I shall look forward to talking again in 20 years, definitely. Definitely. No, I think 20 years of globalization has propelled China into a different league, certainly in many areas. For example, 20 years ago, we always say that China is in a different economic development cycle to some of the OECD countries. But today, in many daily aspects of life, for example, e-commerce, payment, IT, we are at the forefront of that development. So China, I think in the next 20 years, will need to cement its leadership in those areas. We need to embrace digitization. We need to embrace on many areas of what we call the fourth industrial revolution. Right? That is, the combination of AI with robotics revolution, with stem cell research, with the cloud computing, and also with developing the necessary policy governance in the social media. So all these, I think China will have a very important place in its development.
Yes, indeed. But none of these areas is easy in a way when you think about the next stage of development.
That's why FDI is so important. Because so long as FDI is welcome, FDI will make sure that we are always in the forefront of reform, and we're always in the forefront of benchmarking against some of the better practices, and also make sure that domestically, our domestic economy, big as it is, will grow in more qualitative basis rather than just quantitative.
Yeah, but when you look at, Victor, some of these companies, Fortune 500, it used to be all multinationals. None of them were from China originally. But you look at the list now, a lot of them are in China and from China. And yet many of them are state-owned or in its shares very much state-sponsored. So what do you make of this interesting development and phenomenon?
I think two aspects, Wei. One is that it is something to celebrate about. 20 years ago, probably one or two companies in China would have been in the Fortune 500. Today, with 125.
Yes.
Right? And United States is the #1, and is just 10% more than China. Now, but having said that, the measurements of a company in the Fortune 500 basically is the size of its revenue, right? Now, we want to be, yes, we want to be big, but we also want to be good. And that is what you're talking about. That is a huge challenge. We need to be big, good, clean, efficient, and also be engaging in companies of the 21st century. Companies in the 21st century is fundamentally different from companies in the 19th and the 20th century.
How come? What different?
The social impact of a company in the 21st century is much louder than in the 20th century.
Right.
I think this is something which top leadership understands, but it's something that we need to filter down right to the to the ground floor, so that we can embrace the social inclusion, the sustainability, the social impact in earnest.
Yes, indeed. The 19th Party Congress, there are a lot of discussions about these policies.
Yes.
Having said that, though, there is a lot of competition.
Yeah.
The United States just have a tax cut, likely to pass. That's going to have a big impact on the investment environment for the United States vis-a-vis the other countries. You also see Prime Minister Trudeau from Canada was also present at the global forum this time. In fact, he wants to stay here for a couple of days just to lure more international business into his own country.
Yes.
China, of course, is a huge market. Everybody is embracing it. But the question is, what is going to be your competitive edge? Still relying on the size?
Well, part of it, the scale matters.
Of course.
But that's only one issue. I think competition for FDI is going to be fierce. Not only the United States, but many parts of Europe and Asia, they're also reducing their corporate taxes in order to attract foreign investments,
right,
and also to attract and retain talent. I think the companies of the 21st century, the fierce competition is not only in monetary capital, financial capital, but also in human capital. Now that we need to make a huge investment based on the right policy and the right strategies going forward.
But Jack Ma the other day was arguing at the forum. He was suggesting, don't complain about doing business in China is difficult. If you cannot do business in China well, you cannot do it anywhere else well. He said, be patient, embrace the Chinese market, work for the customers, not just for the boss back in the headquarters. So these advices he gave to the multinational companies. Having said that, though, do we consider China still as exceptional? I mean, China probably is already becoming the standard in a way.
I think there is a body of opinion amongst multinational that China today is slightly more difficult than, let's say, 20 years ago in terms of for multinationals. Right? I think part of it is true, and part of it is multinational had it too good in a way when China first started open policy. In those days, multinational bring in capital and standards and techniques, right, that we normally second guess, right? Today, competition from domestic companies is very effective, and we sometimes compete, head on with the best multinational. And so I think there's a bit of both. But I think we need to continue to improve in our investment environment, including the rule of law, the transparency of our tax and accounting system, enforcement consistency. Right. So positive angles of the anti-corruption policy will give multinational more comfort. Then doing business in China will be more ethical, cleaner, and free from bureaucratic abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Victor, what a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much indeed.
All the best at the Fortune Global Forum this year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you from the city of Guangzhou, where the Fortune Global Forum takes place this week. And coming up on today's program, protection of the earth from pollution, a serious business. China's great efforts and green efforts with man-made forests have paid off. What more can be done? We'll ask those panelists right after this break.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 2017 Champion of the Earth for Inspiration and Action in China is China's Saihanba Afforestation Community.
The third UN Environment Assembly wrapped up in Nairobi, Kenya on Wednesday with the renewed mission of fixing rising pollution. It calls on the world to take more action towards a pollution-free planet. The conference did recognize big efforts to go green, awarding 2017 Champions of the Earth Award to China's Saihanba National Forest Park. Saihanba, located in northern China's Hebei province, was a barren land some 55 years ago. It's now the largest man-made forest park in the world. The forest absorbs 747,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year, which is of great help in improving North China's ecosystem. For more on China's Saihanba Forest Park and the ecosystem rebuilding, we are joined by Mr. Chen Liangzhong, who is the CEO and board member of Operation Earth, and also Mr. Zhang Jianyu, China project leader from the U.S. Environment Defense Fund. Welcome to both of you. I want to start by asking both of you, this is quite a thing for China, because it's been quite some time that China has been not awarded with that specific significant achievement award, but what would this mean for environmentalists in China like you, Mr. Zhang?
Well, I think China certainly deserve it, and I think we have made so many achievements through, I would say, the past 5 to 10 years. But I think this award certainly is a huge recognition of one of the achievements that we have been making for the past 5 to 10 years.
This is at a time when China is fighting huge pollution. And also China is at a crossroads as to how to deal with the smog issue, which the world knows these days. I remember going on trips these days and people would ask, how would you survive the smog in wintertime? So, Mr. Chen, how would you look at this award vis-a-vis China's overall efforts trying to go through one of the most difficult times of environmental challenge?
I think it's number one is recognize China's huge effort in past several decades. At the same time, to give China's encouragement to further make further efforts to improve our environment. So this is a very significant achievement and also a kind of challenge for us to working even harder.
Well, working harder, Mr. Chen, what area?
Especially in the ecological conservation, for the reforestation, and then the combat of desertification.
There are a lot of missions, all mixed, it seems, Mr. Zhang. Even in the 19th Party Congress report, you could see a lot of priorities being set up, which all needs a strenuous effort. So the question is, will China be able to achieve all of this at the same time? Not to forget that people would argue this is a certain development stage, and China has to go through certain development stage in order to reach a better future of environmental situation. Mr. Zhang, what do you think?
Well, I think the order certainly comes from the top. I think our president recognized the ultimate importance of the environment that Chinese people truly deserve. And also, I think the leadership also recognized that environment not necessarily could be a burden or a constraint to the development, but rather, if you use it wisely, that environment can lead. You can use the environment to optimize what's called the development mode of China, to green the economy, and then to inject more impetus into the Chinese economy development to make it more sustainable.
But you think about Saihanba, for example, because it has already won a huge award. Let's talk about it. It is used as a place to absorb carbon dioxide. And of course, it's been reforested in order to make that happen. And yet, China is a country, lack of land when it comes to per capita. So where are the lands for agricultural use, industrial use, and of course for environmental, even for breeze, for the cities and the rural areas? This is very hard debate. So, Mr. Zhang, is Saihanba an exceptional example, or it could be used as an interesting model for the other places to follow?
Well, I think my way of reading the Saihanba is really at a turning point. I actually call that a turning point. If you look at it, Saihanba, the mission started back to 55 years ago, right? And I didn't watch that closely, but I was saying that is the time that we're probably at the lowest point of our ecological deterioration. And then it's coming back. But Saihanba, I think, is leading the nation, started that mission earlier, and then achieve what we are achieving here today. But I think today the Saihanba is also leading, because today the whole country is going into this greenization process. But I think Saihanba demonstrates a higher level of persistency and consistency in the green effort, and to lead us to show that it actually can work.
Well, beautifully said. It actually can work, but will it work in the short term? Because as I mentioned earlier, there are very urgent environmental tasks that China needs to deal with. Smog is one of those examples, and that has to be done because even social stability needs efforts in order to address that issue. So, Mr. Chen, is Saihanba in that regard a very exceptional example because it is stretching a very long time? It is something that you plant the seeds, only blossom decades later. Can China still afford that kind of slow process? Or there has to be some kinds of, even great leap forward effort in order to deal with some of the most urgent tasks we have today. And we all know, whenever you make great leap forward efforts, there are always side effects at the end of the day. Mr. Chen.
I think for the improvement of the ecological conditions of China, need long-term persistence. We cannot achieve the improvement in a short time. So this is really not exceptional, but in terms of long-term effort, it is what it should be. Well, in terms of exceptional, I think it's because the government effort, government support is really at that time in 1962 started such kind of reforestation efforts by setting up the mechanized forest farm by sending university students, almost 200 students working there. At that time, I still think the decision made at that time is really exceptional, especially considered China at that time just overcome the natural disasters and the food shortage crisis system.
A project is 65 or even 45 years ago. How much will be of reference to today, Mr. Zhang? For example, about the smog issue. People are asking that every winter, and they're asking it every month, and they're asking it every week, and probably every day. Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think you can look at the issue from several aspects. One is that I think the Saihanba itself has a material contribution to the reduction of the smog, because Saihanba certainly made a huge contribution to anti-desertification. Remember, Beijing was covered by a sandstorm, not very long ago, 10, 15 years ago when I was, I was born here, so I literally remember that. So that's one thing. The other one is you mentioned about all the carbon dioxide that Saihanba has absorbed. Certainly, I think in places like in Beijing, climate change has made a contribution in terms of the things like El Niños, all the weather patterns inversions made a contribution to the smog issues here, not only on the pollution side, but also on the weather side. But I think the very reason Saihanba got this award, that really tells us that, environment protection has a temporal dimension. Everything takes time, but it is really need the external input and external intervention, like the government policy or the award like this, recognition from the UN, to help us to reduce that temporal dimension of the effort. So to tell people that it actually works, and you need to find all the ways and all the policy instruments try to shorten that effort so that it can make it effect today.
Who are the players leading the change? I think that is also an important issue here. Whether it is forever the government, because at urgency, government will jump out and say, let's just do it, and lead all the forces of the society to be able to concentrate the efforts and make it happen. However, in the mid and the longer term, it cannot be just government alone. So who are the players in the plan? Are there spaces for players to take their positions and also make their contributions? What about institutional building? What kind of institutional building we are talking about here? We can use this issue of smog. We can also use this very specific example of Saihanba to help us to understand this. Mr. Zhang.
Well, I think if you look at, again, the environmental landscape, there's so many players in this, right?
Yes.
There's certainly the role of the government, and I think, I think the 19th Party Congress probably give us the clearest message with regard to the role the government is going to play. I think the industry is really coming up. If you examine carefully of the behavior of not only the state-owned enterprises, but all the private-owned enterprises, everybody's coming up. Everybody's trying to come up, with very innovative ideas. People talk a lot like the mobike, right? Bike sharing, car sharing.
Even though it has become quite a big problem these days because of some of the follow-up measures have not been necessarily implemented.
Right, but we can't deny it makes a contribution to the environment.
New ideas.
I think the public is also calling. If you look back on May the 26th, the party organized a meeting called for what they call the two greens. The green, not the green industrialization, but also green consumption. So it calls for the change of the behavior of the individuals, because I think recognize individual does play a role here. But I wouldn't say that. I think everybody is trying to go to the same direction, but it needs coordination. And this plan you're referring to is exactly, I think, is trying to play that role to coordinate everybody's effort to make them synchronize, to go into the same direction. And I think, again, I keep coming back to the Saihanba case, is if you look at Saihanba, I'm sure all the players are playing a role there, you know, really to make this happen. Otherwise, it won't be able to happen. It won't stand there for 55 years.
The thing that I mentioned specifically, that is, China has to have a plan that can be implementable, but at the same time serve two purposes, if the two purposes are different. One is to be able to deal with some of the most urgent issues China is facing when it comes to environmental issues, and the other is fulfill its international commitment on the climate change issues.
Well, I think there is something there. This is called SDG. This is the Global Sustainable Development Target by 2030. I think China has already signed up to that, and that certainly aligns both domestic and international commitments China has made. But I want to say that I think the situation has also changed. That China used to be, you know, more sort of follow the international lead and then just concentrate on the domestic issues. But I think, again, if you read the 19th Party Congress, it recognized the climate change as an unconventional security threat, and also a cause for China to fully fulfill its commitment under the Paris Agreement. In the meantime, that deal with the domestic issues and build the beautiful China. So I think that, again, I think this document is really careful reading, and we're certainly looking forward to the plan that's coming up in the March NPC meeting. But I think the way that this thing, as I understand it, has been really closely aligned with each other. So it certainly first domestic purposes, because we need to protect our people, but also to fulfill the commitment China has to the globe.
Saihanba, a project with a vision, started decades ago, finally see its flowers blossom, and that fragrance has been encouraged and praised by the world by this specific award. But more importantly than that is, what about the overall plan? Not a specific project, but every project has to work in the right direction. For now, I want to thank the two of you, Chen Liangzhong and Zhang Jianyu, for being with us. Thank you so much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night. Thank you, sir.